A single military alliance has forced China to rethink how it would fight its next war. That shift did not come from speeches or summits. It came from money, industry, and hard military integration. Japan has committed $550 billion to the United States, the largest foreign investment in American history. This is not about trade deals or diplomatic goodwill. It is about building a war-fighting partnership so deep and so tightly integrated that every serious contingency plan in China now has to be rewritten. Stay with this, because you are about to see why Chinese military planners openly describe this alliance as an existential threat and how the weapons and systems emerging from it could reshape the entire Indo-Pacific balance of power. For decades, Japan deliberately restrained itself. Article 9 of its constitution, written after World War II, limited offensive military capabilities. Japan could defend its territory, but it could not project power beyond its borders. That framework defined regional security for generations. That era is over. China's military expansion forced the change. Over the last 15 years, Beijing has built the largest navy in the world by hull count. It has fielded hypersonic weapons designed to strike aircraft carriers before they can reach Taiwan. It has turned reefs and islands in the South China Sea into forward operating bases. At the center of China's strategy sits the first island chain, a defensive barrier stretching from Japan through Taiwan and down to the Philippines. Break through that chain, and China's navy reaches the open Pacific. Hold it, and Chinese power remains constrained. Japan sits at the northern anchor of that chain, and Japan has decided it is done playing defense. This brings us to the question driving everything you are about to see. Can this newly militarized United States-Japan alliance actually deter China from moving on Taiwan? Or does it accelerate the timeline toward open conflict? Here is why this matters far beyond Asia. If China believes it can overwhelm Japanese and American forces in the Western Pacific, Taiwan becomes vulnerable. If Japan and the United States build a layered defensive network, backed by credible offensive strike capability, the entire regional balance shifts. This is not incremental change. Japan is transforming into the world's third largest military spender. It is deploying systems capable of striking targets deep inside hostile territory. It is restructuring command authority to enable joint offensive operations alongside American forces. But here is where this becomes truly dangerous. This alliance is not just about missiles or fighter jets. It is about three major shifts happening at the same time. And China is watching every one of them very closely. Let's start with that $550 billion figure, because it is not what most people think. This is not foreign aid. This is Japan investing in American manufacturing, aerospace, and defense production with a very specific goal. Japan needs weapons. Advanced weapons. Weapons that can hit targets 1,600 kilometers away. And it needs them faster than domestic production can deliver. Here is the breakdown. Japan is committed to purchasing 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles with accelerated deployment timelines. These are not defensive interceptors. These are offensive strike weapons with a range of roughly 1,600 kilometers, the distance from Okinawa to Beijing. Japan also agreed to buy 100 Boeing aircraft and dramatically expand bilateral defense equipment production on both American and Japanese soil. Why does this scare China? Because it weaponizes economic interdependence. For years, China used its manufacturing dominance and market access as leverage over neighbors. Japan just flipped that script. By pouring hundreds of billions into American defense industries, Tokyo ensures Washington has a massive financial incentive to defend Japan while simultaneously reducing dependency on Chinese supply chains. But there is a kicker. This investment does not just buy existing weapons. It funds next-generation systems that both countries are developing together. Hypersonic interceptors, advanced stealth missiles, integrated command networks. China spent 2 decades building its military-industrial complex in isolation. Japan and the US are merging theirs. The message to Beijing is clear. You are not just facing Japan's military, You are facing the combined technological and industrial capacity of the world's first and third largest economies, optimized for Pacific warfare. Now, here is where the strategy gets even more aggressive. Japan's fiscal 2026 defense budget hit $58 billion, a 9.4% increase, and the fourth consecutive year of expansion. That makes Japan the world's third largest military spender, behind only the US and China. But it is not the total spending that matters. It is what they are buying. Over $6.2 billion is allocated specifically for Counterstrike capabilities. That is military terminology for offensive weapons designed to hit enemy territory before they can launch attacks against Japan. Let's break down what that actually means. First, the hypervelocity gliding projectile. Japan began producing this indigenous hypersonic missile in 2023, with deliveries starting this year. The Block 1 version has a 500-kilometer range, enough to cover most of the East China Sea and strike Chinese coastal installations. But the Block 2 variant, expected around 2030, reaches 3,000 kilometers at hypersonic speeds. That is enough to hit targets deep inside mainland China, including military bases in Inner Mongolia. Hypersonic means faster than Mach 5, over 3,800 miles per hour. At those speeds, traditional air defense systems cannot react fast enough. China has invested billions in hypersonic weapons precisely because they are nearly impossible to intercept. But here is the part that kept Chinese military planners up at night. Japan did not just buy offensive hypersonics. They also co-developed with the US a glide phase interceptor, a defensive system designed specifically to shoot down hypersonic weapons. It is derived from the SM-3 ballistic missile interceptor, modified to track and destroy hypersonic glide vehicles during their mid-flight phase. Think about that for a second. Japan now possesses both the sword and the shield in hypersonic warfare. They can strike Chinese targets at speeds Beijing cannot defend against, while simultaneously defending Japanese territory from China's own hypersonic arsenal. Then there is the stealth problem China cannot solve. Japan operates F-35A Lightning II stealth fighters, the most advanced combat aircraft in production, but Japan equipped them with Joint Strike missiles, creating what defense analysts call a double stealth capability. The F-35 is already invisible to most radar systems. The JSM is a low, observable cruise missile, specifically designed to evade sophisticated air defense networks. When you combine an F-35 carrying JSMs, you get a weapons platform that can theoretically penetrate China's coastal anti-access area denial systems and strike targets as far inland as Beijing, roughly 1,600 kilometers from Okinawa, without refueling. China spent 2 decades building overlapping radar networks, surface-to-air missile batteries, and fighter patrols to keep American and Japanese aircraft away from their coast. The F-35 JSM combination renders much of that investment obsolete, and Japan is not stopping there. They are deploying 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles on ships and potentially submarines, adding JASMER long-range missiles to upgraded F-15 fighters, and fielding Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles on mobile truck launchers across Japan's remote island. What they are building is not a defensive perimeter. It is an offensive kill chain that can strike Chinese naval forces, air bases, and command centers before they ever reach Japanese territory. But weapons alone do not win wars. Command and control does. In March 2025, Japan did something it had not done since World War II. It created a unified military command. For 8 decades, Japan's self-defense forces operated as 3 separate branches: ground, maritime, and air, each with independent chains of command. If China launched a coordinated attack, Japan's Army, Navy, and Air Force would have to coordinate responses through political leadership, not military commanders. In modern warfare, where missiles travel at Mach 6 and decisions need to happen in minutes, the new Joint Operations Command changes everything. All 3 branches now report to a single 4-star commander overseeing 240 personnel in a centralized operations center. Decisions that previously took hours now happen in minutes. intelligence flows instantly across all services. Assets can be redirected in real time based on battlefield conditions. But here is the twist. The United States simultaneously upgraded U.S. Forces Japan, which commands 60,000 American personnel stationed across Japanese territory, into a joint force headquarters specifically designed to integrate with Japan's new JJOC. What does that actually mean in practice? It means Japanese and American forces can now operate as a single combined military during a crisis. No diplomatic delays, no coordination confusion. A Japanese destroyer detects an incoming Chinese hypersonic missile, relays the data instantly to U.S. Aegis ships, which launch interceptors, while Japanese F-35s redirect to engage the launch platform, all within the same integrated command network. China has been preparing for decades to fight the U.S. military and Japan's self-defense forces as separate entities with different response times, coordination challenges, and political constraints. That scenario no longer exists. They are now facing a unified force structure, optimized for rapid crisis response in the Western Pacific. And Beijing knows it. Which brings us to why China responded the way it did. In December 2025, Chinese J-15 fighters did something unprecedented. They directed fire control radar at Japanese aircraft near Okinawa. Let me explain why that matters. Fire control radar is not the same as search radar. When a fighter locks fire control radar onto another aircraft, it is simulating the targeting sequence used immediately before firing a missile. In military aviation, illuminating another aircraft with fire control radar is considered an act of aggression, one step below actually shooting. Both US and Japanese defense chiefs condemned the incident as harmful to regional peace. But it was not an isolated event. China also conducted joint air patrols with Russia around Japan, shortly after Prime Minister Takaichi made comments about defending Taiwan. And Chinese naval vessels have increased their presence around Japan's Southwest Islands, the exact locations where Japan is deploying its new missile system. Why is China escalating tensions now? Because they are watching the strategic window close. The first island chain has always been China's primary obstacle to Pacific dominance. If Japan fortifies those Southwest Islands with mobile missile launchers, stealth fighters, and integrated command networks, breaking through becomes exponentially harder. China's navy might be the largest in the world by hull count, but numbers do not matter if your ships cannot survive the kill zone between China's coast and the open Pacific. Japan's acquisition of 400 Tomahawks, hypersonic strike missiles, and stealth cruise missiles creates overlapping threat rings across the entire East China Sea. Chinese naval forces leaving port would face detection and targeting before they reach Taiwan or beyond. Chinese air bases on the coast would be vulnerable to preemptive strikes. And China's own hypersonic weapons, previously seen as unstoppable, now face credible interception. But there is one more element China cannot ignore: economic pressure. Japan's $550 billion investment directly strengthens American defense industries while explicitly building supply chain independence from China. Every missile Japan buys, every aircraft produced, every integrated system deployed reduces regional dependence on Chinese manufacturing and technology. For 2 decades, China used economic leverage to discourage military opposition. Japan just weaponized economics in the opposite direction, creating financial incentives for American commitment while funding the technologies that contain Chinese expansion. The question now is not whether China feels threatened. The question is what they do about it. So, can this newly militarized US-Japan alliance actually deter China from taking Taiwan? Or will it accelerate the timeline toward conflict? The answer is both, depending on how you define deterrence. Militarily, this alliance creates the most credible conventional deterrent China has faced since the end of the Cold War. Japan is not just hosting American forces anymore. Japan is building offensive strike capabilities, integrating command structures, and deploying weapons systems specifically designed to hold Chinese territory at risk. Combined with American naval power, This creates a scenario where any Chinese move toward Taiwan triggers immediate, overwhelming conventional response from two directions simultaneously. That is textbook deterrence theory. You make aggression so costly that it becomes irrational, but here is what you need to remember. First, deterrence only works if both sides believe the other will actually follow through. China needs to believe Japan and the US will defend Taiwan with force, and that the costs of fighting exceed any potential gains. Every weapon system deployed, every exercise conducted, every command structure integrated sends that message. Second, this arms buildup does not happen in a vacuum. China is not sitting still. They are expanding their naval fleet, developing their own hypersonic systems, and hardening their military infrastructure against strikes. The question is not whether Japan and the US are getting stronger, it is whether they are getting stronger faster than China can adapt and overcome. Third, there is a timing problem. Military analysts call this the window of vulnerability. If China believes the strategic balance is shifting against them, they might choose to act now, while they still have advantages, rather than wait for Japan's new capabilities to reach full operational status. That is the acceleration risk. Sometimes, building deterrence too quickly creates pressure to preempt. What happens next will determine whether the Indo-Pacific enters an era of stable deterrence or a dangerous spiral toward confrontation. Japan's transformation from defensive pacifist to offensive military power is only 3 years old. The weapons systems we have discussed, many are not fully deployed yet. The command integration is still being refined. The $550 billion investment is just beginning to flow through industrial supply chains. China has a choice: accept the new strategic reality and pursue diplomatic solutions, or challenge it before the window closes completely. Based on their recent actions, the fire control radar incidents, the joint patrols with Russia, the increased naval presence, Beijing is choosing to push back. The next 5 years will be critical. That is when Japan's hypersonic Block II missiles reach operational status, when the full Tomahawk arsenal gets deployed, when the integrated US-Japan command structure matures into a seamless warfighting network. If we reach 2030 without conflict, deterrence probably worked. If we do not, it means China decided to move before the alliance became too strong to challenge. The question now is not whether this alliance changes the military balance. It absolutely does. The question is whether it changes China's calculus enough to prevent conflict, or whether it convinces Beijing that their window is closing and they need to act while they still can. That is what makes this moment so dangerous and so important to understand. If this video helped you stay updated, tap like, share it around, and subscribe for the next big tech story.